Hello, everybody. I'm Phil Brandt, President and CEO of AIM Employers Association, and welcome to This Week at Work.
This Week at Work is the only show about the workplace that offers you front row seats and a microphone, featuring experts in human resources and employment law to bring you practical, timely, and accurate insights so you can more effectively lead your organization. It's Thursday, August 15th, episode 291. 10 years ago, a small town called Ferguson was thrust into the spotlight, becoming a beacon for deep discussions surrounding community and law enforcement. A man was also thrust into the spotlight, special guest Captain Ron Johnson. He joins us on the heels of a CBS special inspired by his book, 13 Days in Ferguson, to give us his take on leadership. Ferguson showed us that actions coming from a small town can impact an entire population, just like actions of the everyday employee can shape the perspective of an entire organization. So the captain asks, why are we only training the top to be leaders? All this and more on This Week at Work.
Hello, everybody. It's glad to be here and back at home in the studio. I've been on the road, Bert, traveling all around to Missouri State Conference SHRM, then the Indiana State Conference SHRM. I mean, it has just been insane travel for me because I don't normally do that kind of travel so frequently. But however, I got to ask you, Bert, have you seen the article from the Google CEO related to working from home and blaming really the previous Google CEO, but blaming the work from home policy as it relates to their lag in open AI?
Yeah, I did. He had some strong words in the article. He's quoted as saying Google decided that work-life balance and going home early and working from home was more important than winning.
Yeah, and that is quite a strong statement from the previous CEO to say that. And I know we talk a lot about working from home and work-life balance and how important all that is. And at the same time, we do talk about the importance of, focusing and winning and teamwork and collaboration. And when everyone is in isolation or looking out for themselves, sometimes we lose sight of the goal, which, is to be profitable and growing as organizations so we can continue to be good employers. It's definitely a catch-22 at times, but it's an interesting article. I guess we can put that up on the website if anyone's interested in seeing it, and that discussion and debate continues, yeah?
It does, and it'll actually ties in with one of the topics I'm going to be talking about on Lawyer on the Clock today, relating to accommodations related to commuting to work.
Well, there you go. Bert, I know pre-show you got a chance to meet Captain Ron Johnson. Many of our AIM members know Captain Ron Johnson from his time as the leader, the peacekeeper for the event that occurred in Ferguson 10 years ago. Horrific event that really has changed our country in many, many ways. Ron, welcome back to the program. It is wonderful to see you and have you on our program. Feel very, very honored anytime I can have your attention because I know you're a busy person. Welcome back, Ron.
Well, nice to see you again, Phil, and meet you, Bert, and I'm excited to be here this morning.
Great. We're going to get right back to you, Ron. We got to get Bert his time for his legal update, and we're going to get right back to you and love to hear more about what you've been doing since that time in Ferguson. All right, let's introduce our poll question here. Which area in the organization is impacted the most by leadership? That's a great question, Nick. So again, that question is, which area in your organization is impacted the most by leadership? I'd like to get that input from you, and maybe we'll take a reflection back on that. Ron, I'm going to ask you to give that some thought too. That's a great question, maybe for us to lead off with. Bert, are you ready for?
Yeah, this is one of those where I do feel that I'm looking at those choices there, and we really probably should have given an all of the above.
That's too easy. No, that's too easy. There's no all of above. We're asking the most. Most can't be everything. Come on, Bert. Are you working from home today?
I think leadership impacts everything.
It does. But which one is the most important?
Yeah.
Bert, as much as you want it to be, the world is not just black and white, okay? There are
That's
some
right.
gray areas, and sometimes it
There's
depends.
a lot of gray area, Bert.
That's
You
how I
lawyers-
make my living, is in that gray area.
Oh yeah, you bet you do. All right. All right, Bert, are you ready to give us a good update?
I am.
All right, Nikki, pull that lever.
All right, it's time to look into what's trending in employment law. Lawyer, you're on the clock.
So we've got a little potpourri today, Phil. I'm going to talk about some cases from the 6th, 7th, and 8th circuits. Not necessarily in that order, but for our viewers, just to remind everybody that we live in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals here in Missouri. That also covers North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa, and Arkansas, in addition to Missouri. The 7th Circuit, our listeners in both Illinois and Indiana, and in addition, Wisconsin are covered by the 7th Circuit. And those folks who live in Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee are covered by the 6th Circuit. So the United States is broken up into these federal court circuits around the country. There are 11 of them, plus the DC Circuit, so a total of 12. And I'm going to talk about 3 of them today. The first one I want to talk about was decided yesterday by our own 8th Circuit Court of Appeals in a very significant case. I know we've talked a lot about in the past the issues of DE&I in the workplace and just how hard it is for employers to get things correct, and that they can't go into DE&I initiatives blindly. They really do need some legal guidance as they do this. And in this particular case, the 8th
Bert,
Circuit,
is this that gray area you're talking about?
this is definitely one of those gray areas that I'm talking about.
Okay.
So yesterday, the 8th Circuit affirmed the decision of a district court decision that granted summary judgment in favor of an employer after an employee was fired for what he claimed was a religious bias reason, because he called a Pride Month rainbow on the company's website an abomination. And in the lawsuit or in the decision, the 3-judge panel said that the former employee did not show that the company targeted his religious convictions, and it noted the company's finding that he ran afoul of a company ban on denigrating groups of people. Therefore, he violated a company policy. So what's significant about this is that the individual had responded to a company survey that he believed was anonymous, and he wrote in that survey, "It's an abomination to God. Rainbow is not meant to be displayed as a sign for sexual gender." But he also had shared his opinion publicly on a message board on the company's intranet, and that prompted the company to fire him for violating its diversity policy on top of other disciplinary issues. And he ended up suing the company back in May of 2022. Like I said, he lost at the trial court level. He has now lost at the Court of Appeals. And I think the case, again, really just illustrates, like you mentioned, Phil, this gray area where had he properly tied it to his religion, and just made his statement on the anonymous survey, or even if he had made it publicly but tied it to his religion, he may have been okay. But here, he didn't tie it to his religion when he made his public statement on the company's intranet. So that he was fired for violating company policy, and the 8th Circuit upheld that decision. I wouldn't be surprised to see this case be taken all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll have to keep our eyes on that one. But once again, it illustrates that difficulty of DE&I efforts in the workplace in light of the Supreme Court's holding regarding the universities and their application process. The DE&I categories really can't be used as a preference for making employment-related, admissions decisions in those cases, but we could fairly read that into that you can't use that for making employment decisions.
Well, it and I think it really goes to show, when these types of things surface, and many of our members take and use employee opinion and engagement surveys. Many of our members have social forums and formats for employees to participate in. And all of those are great things to gain opinions and to have some expression from time to time as it relates to our culture. But in this case, this company appears to be serious about their culture, and that all groups of people are going to be welcome, and that no group of person is going to be attacked or allowed to, be under scrutiny, I think, by other workers in this case in an unfair way. And you have to get legal guidance, right? This is not one of those scenarios to where you can just haphazardly make a decision based on small set of data. You're going to need to consider the impact of this as far reaching, particularly in today's time, because I think everyone has somebody willing to represent them to make a stink out of things.
That is certainly true.
Yeah.
That is certainly true. All right, well, let's shift gears real quickly, Phil. I want to talk about a case that also came down yesterday, but this time from the Sixth Circuit, and this is going back a few years, but the decision was just issued yesterday. And the Sixth Circuit upheld Biden's firing of Trump's top NLRB lawyer. You'll remember that on the show many years ago, I relayed that President Biden, on almost day one of his administration, fired the Trump-era NLRB General Counsel Peter Robb and replaced him with Peter Orr. And that was almost immediate. That firing has been upheld by the Fifth and Ninth Circuits, but the U.S. Supreme Court last month remanded the matter back down to the Fifth Circuit for reconsideration in light of the Chevron doctrine decision, which we've talked about extensively on that show. In this particular case, a construction company contested Biden's January 2021 removal of Robb, who had 10 months remaining in his 4-year term, after Orr, the new NLRB General Counsel under Biden, issued unfair labor practice complaints against this particular company. The company argued that Robb's removal was invalid, so the complaint from Orr was also invalid. The appeals court concluded that the U.S. Constitution gives the president the authority to remove those who assist him in carrying out his duties, and Biden's removal power of an executive officer is generally plenary, meaning that it really is without restriction. And so I think that this is really important in light of the upcoming presidential election, because a decision like this does have some precedential effect if by chance Trump would get elected and he wants to then turn around and remove the NLRB's current general counsel, Jennifer Abruzzo, who we've also talked about on this program often, and who is distinctly anti-employer. And if Trump were to be elected, I think this decision would give him some authority to say, yes, you could remove Jennifer Abruzzo on day one of your administration. Of course, if Vice President Harris gets elected, I would imagine that the current general counsel will continue in her role unabated.
Right. Well, that's interesting to see, but I think what I took out of that, Bert, was they pushed it back down. So this all occurred years ago before Chevron decision was made, and then in light of that, they pushed it back down and said reconsider based upon Chevron.
Well, the Supreme Court told the Fifth Circuit to reconsider, but yet this was a Sixth Circuit case that decided that the firing was lawful. And so it'll certainly end up on the Supreme Court's door again, and we'll have to see what the court does with this.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, there, lawyer on the clock. Anything else?
I was going to talk about real quickly, Phil, some tips related to commute related accommodation requests, but I think we'll save that for next week because I know we're running out of time on Lawyer on the Clock, and we want to get to Captain Johnson here.
Absolutely. But those will be good for us to get is those tips on commute to work, to and from, and everywhere in between. Maybe we can get to those next week. Ron, let's get to you, buddy. And it's so good to be back in conversation with you. I can't believe it's really been already 10 years. And if I can just give our listeners a quick update. 10 years ago in the city of Ferguson, a small suburb here in St. Louis community, we had two really major waves of activity. We had, the unfortunate killing of Michael Brown Jr., and then we had Darren Wilson, who was not indicted. And both of those created circumstances that are just unbelievable that you had to manage and lead. You had hundreds of officers in riot gear during the unrest between the community and law enforcement. You were tapped, and it was an amazing story to hear how you were tapped and how surprised you were to learn that you were going to be asked to be the leader representing the Missouri State Highway Patrol during that time, and what ultimately came out to be the role of a peacemaker in many ways. No doubt, Ron, this had to change your life. You woke up and you had immediate life change with the assignment and duty that you accepted at that time. Ron, can you give us some idea of how did this change your life 10 years later? Tell us a little bit about where it's taken you and what you've learned since then.
Well, thanks for having me, Phil. That moment in time really has made me a stronger leader. It's made me really look at and analyze what leadership means. And I think for me, I got back to being the basic of the leader that I am. And I talk about being a servant leader. I think sometimes we get really caught up in the titles that we have. And I would say the first day that I stepped on the streets of Ferguson in that uniform, I thought the title that I had in the uniform would be enough to bring peace. And it really wasn't. It was getting back down to being that servant leader who actually listens and understands and has compassion. And so that really drove me to my plan and my approach to doing Ferguson. And now, I've expanded my outreach of leadership. I started a company called Lodestone. And, we do a lot of consulting. We do leadership training. We go and we've talked to law enforcement, we've talked to corporations, nonprofits, and we talk about the importance of leadership and what it really means. And we talk about being a worthy leadership and what makes that are the people that you serve. And leadership must be an honor, but leadership is a challenge. And it not only affects the leader, but it affects those around us, our family, our friends, and our daily walk. And so, I continue to do that. Continue to do work in St. Louis with different groups, just trying to bring that connectivity between whether it's the workforce and companies or whether it's just the community and law enforcement.
So Ron, the word Servient leader, we talk a lot about that in some of the training programs that we offer here at AIM. I hear a lot of leaders talk about why I'm a Servient leader style. And I think that can mean a lot of different things, but I don't know, Nick, if you are able to see the photo I picked for my screen here. I know Ron will know this photo if it's visible, Ron, and it's where you're walking, I believe, the streets of Ferguson, and you're hugging a man that has killer and police on the back of his shirt. And that was a famous photo at its height during the Ferguson protests and riots. When you chose that position and then you were practicing your leadership on the spot, right? You hadn't had this kind of training and preparation. That to me is one example, and I've been privileged enough to hear your presentation about those days, but that's one example of Servient leadership that takes on a message different than many people think of in Servient leader. To go hug a man that's got that on their shirt representing maybe you as the opposition is a great example of serving all, not just those who agree with you.
And in that moment, I think some people were surprised that I would hug him. But I walked up and his arms were outreached. And I think that was a moment that told me that uh, I was asking him not to judge me for the uniform that I was wearing, and I must be the same. But he had his arms reached out. And that tells me that's someone that's wanting to talk, that's someone that's wanting to communicate, and that's someone who has a need. And I think I remember that embrace. It was a tight embrace. And it really weren't words exchanged. He
Yeah.
just said, thank you for being here.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just a fantastic expression, I think, sometimes of, helping build bridges by reaching across aisles and so forth. Ron, one of the things that you talked about recently in the programming that you've done, I think it was on CBS, there was a special 10 years after Ferguson that you recently have been involved in. But one of the things you talk about is reaching out not just to leaders with leadership training. Tell us where you discovered this and why is this important?
Well, I think to give value, I think we give value. We need to give value to everyone in our companies, everyone in our organizations. But I just look back at Ferguson and a lot of things that weren't reported on the news, a lot of things that allowed me and helped me during that time were just people that were on the ground, people that didn't have titles, that were just mothers, fathers, sons, cousins, and so forth. And so, companies, I think, a lot of times we don't give leadership training until someone reaches a certain height in our corporation, or until someone says, I see something in them. Well, on a daily basis, a lot of leadership goes on at the bottom. And it is that leadership that goes on often, and probably more time than the leader at the top really has to play that role. And those bottom tier leaders, and if you give them value, you'll see greater outcomes. You'll see greater outcomes in your communities, greater outcomes in your corporations, greater outcomes in your nonprofits. And so it's just important to give value and letting those leaders know that you can lead without a title, and your leadership has an enormous impact.
Yeah, I know when I talk with my kids, I would always express leadership is not a title. There are titles that we respect because of their position, political titles. They're in the medical profession, and as a police officer, there's titles and people that have positions that deserve a certain level of respect and compassion due to the title. But every person leads. Leadership is not a title. And that's the discussion that we have. Leadership is what you do as an individual and how you influence those around you all the time, either by supporting or by contrasting even another opinion of another person. You're in one way or another always leading by example. Talk to us a little bit about, use a great example about when you walk into a business, often it isn't the leaders who are making the first impression. It's all the other workers. And I think you may have used an example about a hospital worker. Give us some examples there.
We spoke with a hospital and we talked to their workers. And I talked about when I walk into a hospital, the first thing that I look at is how clean the hospital is and what it looks like coming in that first view. And I said, what about a morning when two maintenance guys are there and they're cleaning, and one is having a bad day, says, I just don't feel like working today. And the other guy says, well, what's going on? And he kind of explains, and the other guy gives him some advice and some solutions, or at least says, I've gone through that, and this is what I did. And then as the day goes on, the guy says, you know what? I feel a lot better. Now they're both cleaning. They're both doing this great job. Well, that impacts that hospital for everybody that comes in, whether it's a visitor, whether it's a patient. And that has been a great leadership moment. That gentleman has given his coworker a great leadership moment. And what value does that have for that hospital or that business?
Yeah.
And so, but you have to give value to that. That gentleman needs to know that he can make those leadership decisions. When we have two individuals that are together and one is making a bad decision, that someone steps in and corrects that. That's a leadership moment. And so we have to value those. And I think when we do that, when I give these presentations, I tell you, Phil, the reaction of those workers that have never been given that kind of training or been told that they've got valued leadership and that they are leaders in their own right, it's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that gets back to that heart of that servient leader. It's not who we choose to serve, it's that we serve everyone in that style of leadership. And I know in our training, people right away can connect with servient leadership, but what we discover in the training often is what are your boundaries when you think of yourself as a servient leader? And that's why I wanted to bring this photo up in that conversation, because in the truest sense of servient leader, you're really serving everyone before yourself. And that is what makes servient leadership style extremely difficult. Now, I know in my household, I can practice that pretty easily, right? I mean, I got my wife, I got the dogs, I got the kids, and then somewhere down here, I come in that picture. But usually I'm the very last one, and that's not by my choice of being a servient leader. That's just a hierarchy in the Brandt household. But it's not an easy road to be a servient leader. Ron, can you tell us a little bit about how did the CBS primetime special 13 Days in Ferguson come about?
And so I wrote a book called 13 Days in Ferguson and kind of just highlighted my experiences doing Ferguson. And then, we ended up talking with CBS, Cedric Entertainer, his agent, Eric Rohn. And we also talked about wanting to show it on the live screen and just show that there's courage that goes into leadership, the challenges of leadership, because we have a lot of leaders that do a great job on a daily basis, a lot of law enforcement leaders, and just showing those challenges, the courage that goes with it, the impact that it can have on the leader, the impact that it can have on family, but also the importance of compassion and empathy and how we can bridge gaps together. And so the special 13 Days in Ferguson actually has some activists that were there on the ground in Ferguson, some other religious leaders, business leaders, but it also showed me sitting on the couch talking to Michael Brown Jr.'s father. And I think it just shows what compassion, empathy, being a servant leader, what you can accomplish in relationships, not only in the community, but also within your business and your organization.
Yeah. Is when you think back and where you are today and the connections you still have to the Brown family, the Ferguson community, is there any one thing that you look back and you feel really most proud of, the change that you've seen come forth that makes you proud and puts a smile on your face?
I always say the leaders must walk down the middle of the road. That's always the toughest part of the road where the rumble strips are. But I think just the ability to still walk in this arena and have bridged relationships and hopefully making things better. When my phone rings, whether it's from law enforcement, whether it's from companies, are those individuals that were on the streets of Ferguson, that were truly on the other side of law enforcement, that are willing to talk and have a different view and are willing to seek change and seek improvement. And so I think it's those things that I'm most proud of.
Yeah, when I was doing some research before the program, and I mean the city has really gone through a complete transformation from its political structure, the police department structure, the activities that the community is involved in, where today there's a community center in place of a Quick Trip, and I mean it's just really from a St. Louis point of view, you see a transformation that has occurred. I believe that's the journey, the start of the journey for improvement. But most of our listeners around the country don't necessarily see these things, right? Because it's the newest story that they're going to read about in the news, in the headline. How often do you speak with the Brown family still today, if at all?
I have spoken. Matter of fact, I attended on Sunday. They had a church celebration, and my wife and I went and sat in the church and listened to the speeches and the talks. There was an unfortunate incident in Ferguson on last Friday, and you're right that the Ferguson community is doing a lot of hard work. And they've made a lot of gains and a lot of changes. And that was an unfortunate incident, and I prayed for Officer Brown. But yesterday, I got a text from Michael Brown Sr. asking that he wanted to possibly meet with the family of Officer Brown and give them his sympathy and his prayers. And he asked if I would join him in visiting them. And so, those are the things that the media might not hear or report. But I think
Right.
it gives us hope of where we can go and where we're going in this community, in this country.
Yeah. The reason why I brought that up, Ron, because you were kind enough to share that with Bert and I in the pre-show, is I think that's an example, again, of what you mean when you're talking about Servient leadership and when you are talking to your audiences and the platform that you have through your consulting and the book that you wrote, is that's off the screen. That's behind the spotlights. No one is aware of it. You can get paid to do that. Take the call, spend the time, help the healing. It's just a continuation of your mission and what you've been called to do, necessarily not what you signed up to do. And for that, I know those are the things that really make me proud to know you, Ron, and you don't realize this, but I often have asked myself in different times of difficulty, I wonder what Ron would do in this situation here. It's a tough spot, and we don't always know right from wrong. And like you say, it's that gray area. One last thing, I know you have several tips on leadership. Is there any final tip on leadership you'd like to leave the audience with? And then we'll encourage them to go out, find your book, and look you up here.
Leadership must encompass compassion and empathy. I wake up each day and I tell people that before I get out of bed, I look at my feet and I ask what my impact will be today, what my steps will be, and how impactful they will be. So I would ask each of you each day to look at yourself and say what your steps will be and what the impact they will have.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, Ron, tell us the name of your book, where they can get it, how they can reach out to you if they would like to engage in conversation with you.
Name of the book is 13 Days in Ferguson. Barnes & Noble, all the bookstores will have it. You can get it over the internet. The name of our company is Lodestone. It's at ron.johnson at lodestonesg.com, LODESTONESG.com. And Phil, I want to say that we talk about servant leadership. I think our partnership that we've had, our friendship that we've had with AIM, AIM has a servant leadership in their leadership style and their training style. And so I've always appreciated that. And so thank you very much.
Oh, Ron, you're very, very welcome. We're happy to have you a part of our community of leaders, and I'm glad to call you a friend. And I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your message here. And I can't wait to hear, what 20 years after Ferguson looks like and hear from you then. You keep up the good work. We appreciate that. Bert, thank you for always providing us a great legal update there, Nick. As always, you did a good job. We will be back here next week, 7:30 Central Time. Until then, go out and be good to somebody.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link, aimea.org/This Week at Work, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment. LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're everywhere you are. Don't forget you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.